Mike.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate, and thank you everyone for joining. As said, I'm going to take you through a little bit about what Cornish Lithium are doing and how we're looking to exploit geothermal lithium resources here in Cornwall. So without further ado, let's get underway. If my screen works. So forward-looking statement, I won't dwell on that for everyone to read, but I will start by setting a little bit of the scene. So I'm sure everyone on this call knows the importance of lithium and the importance of critical raw material supply chain. But within the UK, we're predicting a huge growth in lithium demand. Europe forecasts the needs for over 500,000 tons of LCE per annum in order to feed the batteries for electric vehicles by 2033. And within the UK, so much of our economy is based on the automotive sector. There's over 60 billion turnover in 2020, and it supports over 800,000 jobs. I believe one of the figures we were given is it's almost 8% of GDP. So it's an absolute critical industry for us. With the drive towards electrification, the drive towards electric vehicles, and the obvious phasing out of diesel and petrol, it's a high growth market. And that probably is enough to cover that because I'm sure everyone is aware of the EV industry. What you might not be aware of is why Cornwall is so advantageous and why Cornish Lithium and others are looking for critical raw materials in Cornwall. Um, Cornwall has had a long mining history. There's over 3,000 known historic tin and copper mines. China clay's been mined here for nearly 300 years, and metals have been found by archaeologists dating back over 3,000 years from Cornwall all across Europe and into parts of Asia. As defined by the USGS, Cornwall hosts one of the largest lithium deposits in Europe, and it's one of the largest lithium-enriched granites in the world. So there's huge potential for lithium as well as the other metals that Cornwall's been famous for in the past. And what we have in Cornwall is the advantage of infrastructure that you don't see elsewhere in the world, and also a supportive regulatory framework. And that goes from the British national government being supportive of the extractive industries down to the local government. Cornwall Council couldn't be more supportive of the extractive industries, and that translates through to the stakeholders and the social groups on the ground who remember the mining heritage, are connected to the mining heritage, and excited to see mining come back to what was such a strong mining area. We still have a significant of those amount of that skill retained within Cornwall, while mining stopped here, excluding the China clay, which is carried on, but sort of hard rock metal mining stopped here in the sort of mid to late 90s. The service industry around mining has stayed strong with things like Camborne School of Mines, but also consultancy and other expertise staying within the county, mineral processing and all sorts of stuff. On top of that, we have the infrastructure. We've got rail networks, we've got power, things that you don't get in a lot of mining jurisdictions. So we're really well placed in Cornwall to look at these natural resources. So moving on to Cornish Lithium, who are we and what do we do? Cornish Lithium has been around since sort of 2016, 2017. And the company was formed based on looking for geothermal lithium, on lithium contained within deep groundwaters, and looking at ways to exploit that geothermal energy as well, either for power or for heat. But we also have a hard rock project, which we're looking to develop. So I'll touch on that very briefly, but the focus of this presentation will stay on the geothermal. But our hard rock project is one of the most advanced lithium projects in the whole of Europe. It's an existing China clay area. So within the China clay district of St Austell, you've got essentially three components within that clay. You've got the clays themselves, which have been exploited. You've got the quartz, which is being used as aggregates. And then you've got the mica, which has been the main waste product from the China clay production. A lot of these micas are lithium enriched, and that's what we're looking to explore for and to develop within that area so that we can process these micas into a lithium product. We've licensed an innovative low carbon processing methodology called the Lapidico process. And essentially, it's an acid leach so that we can not have to roast these materials. We can leach them out with acid and generate a lithium hydroxide product within our plant. I'll go into where we're at in a minute, but just to move over to the geothermal side, we're a little bit earlier stage on the geothermal side. We're exploring and we're looking to put a demo project in place, which I'm going to talk to you a bit more about today. But we've been drilling boreholes and we've been pulling together historic information in order to try and exploit this resource. What we're looking to do is use direct lithium extraction, and again, I'll go into detail on what direct lithium extraction is a little later in the presentation, at relative small scale. So build lots of small plants dotted around Cornwall with a producing well and an injection well, and then a small processing plant in the middle producing a lithium chloride product. As a company, we have over 1,000 square kilometers of agreements for mineral rights in place. I won't give you a mineral rights lecture on this particular webinar, but mineral rights in the UK are particularly complex, primarily held by private hands rather than administered by the government. We started out as a small startup, as you would, and we raised seed capital from initial high net worths and grant funding, along with some crowdcube money. But recently we've had a large institutional package come in, which closed at the tail end of last year to a tune of about 71 million. There is an option to draw down further finance on that based on milestones within the projects. As it stands, we have about 100 employees. I think that number's creeping up to 108, so we're growing very fast. And to put that into context, I was the 8th employee in the company, and that was only in 2019, so we've grown very quickly. So I said I'd touch on the Trelava project quickly, our hard rock project. So this is my only slide on it, but just to make you aware, we have a maiden resource, and we have done quite a lot of mini test work, mini plant test work, and completed a scoping study, which was published in 2022. We're currently in the construction phase of a demonstration plant, which is actually undergoing commissioning at the moment, and we're looking to complete a full feasibility study alongside planning, hopefully early 2025, with a view of getting this project into construction and producing in sort of 2027, 2028. We're targeting an average yearly production of about 10,000 tonnes per annum, and so far it seems to be going quite well. So just very briefly on the business model of geothermal lithium and what we're looking to do here in Cornwall. So as I said, we're generally looking at a production and injection well, a heat exchange on top, and then a processing plant to process the lithium out. We therefore end up with two byproduct credits, one being heat and the other being the potential for potable water. So the idea is we'll produce water, we'll take the heat out of that water, use that heat for direct heating applications. We're not interested in power, we're after direct heating applications. Take the lithium out, which will get shipped off as a lithium chloride product, and use any other byproducts we can, such as the water or other metals contained. We'll go into more detail as to how this works. So it all starts with targeting and exploration. We are predominantly a geoscience company. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to target the regional potential of Cornwall. You have a large granite that underlies the county. The granite's lithium enriched. It's been fractured through millions of years of tectonic activity, and you have the water circulating within the fracture. So one of the big differences in Cornwall and in the geothermal potential here is you are dealing with a fracture basement network rather than a sort of more standard oil and gas reservoir like you'd see, or the sort of reservoirs that you'd see for lithium in South America. We've built an extensive mineral rights package, and what we're trying to do is overlay the structures, the mineral rights, the land constraints, and then things like heat load and potential to sell heat and water, overlay that in GIS and generate target sites where we can explore for lithium and ultimately drill. We're trying to keep our surface impact small. We take ESG very seriously. We take our environmental credentials very seriously. So we want to do this in as low impact a way as possible. And that's why we've developed this concept of having lots of small plants, each taking up a relatively small surface footprint, and each producing a relatively modest but combined a reasonable amount of lithium per annum. So we're targeting about 500 tonnes per annum for site, and looking to basically leverage this up. Heat and water in Cornwall are fairly critical. As a lot of you may know, a huge amount of our energy within the UK is used for direct heating applications. We believe that if we have essentially a free heat source from geothermal, this would be better. We're predominantly looking at industrial applications, but we are considering housing and other applications, housing agriculture, for example. Obviously, a 24/7 industrial process is more exciting economically, but because this heat is a waste product to us, it gives us lots of opportunity to use it in lots of different ways. Water-wise, that's something which we're still developing, and certainly something we can't fully commit to at this stage. But in theory, we will be moving large amounts of water, and our process should produce potable water. So it's an area of potential expansion we have. So what does the targeting look like? Ultimately, what we're trying to do is build up a structural model. So we take historic data, we take modern data, and we try and build that into 3D geological models. One of the big advantages of Cornwall is we've been mining here for thousands of years, and particularly in the mining heyday of the 17 and 1800s, we've been left with a huge cache of data. Um, Most of this information is in paper format, it's plans, it's sections, it's long sections from the historic mining activities. A lot of this is still privately owned. A lot of it ends up coming up as auction or being held by the landowning families that hold the mineral rights. What we've been looking to do is piece that together and then bring it into a digital format. So we have a team of archivists who are taking sections like the one you see on the screen. We then have a team of geologists that draw over them with the digitized parts you see on your screen here. And ultimately, when you get that information into a 3D modeling package, you can build it into a 3D model, which is what you see on the right there. And from that, we can start to target boreholes. Ultimately, when it comes to the exploration, drilling is king. We do have some geophysics, and we're looking to develop other geophysics techniques. But if we want to really test the target, we've got to drill it. So the photos on the right of your screen there show one of our drill sites. In fact, two separate drill sites. The drone photo and the photo of the rig are two separate drill sites, and the drill core to give an example of what we're doing. I'll show you on a map how these sites relate to each other on the next slide. But we're currently drilling at Tolgus near Red Ruth, for those of you that know Cornwall. We're drilling to about 2,000 meters and we're about 900 meters down at the moment. Our main target sits at about 1,500 meters. So we've still got a way to go, but we're quite excited about that project. Our initial drilling was at United Downs, which is in central Cornwall. Some of you may know the United Downs Deep Geothermal project, which is just down the road. So there's a bit of a geothermal theme going on the industrial estate that we're sitting on. We drilled 2 holes there to 1,000 meters, targeting permeable structures. We hit them within 10 meters of where they've been modeled, and we're able to produce lithium-enriched waters with very interesting chemistry. And again, we'll get onto that in a second. We then drilled at a place called Crosslanes and Blackwater, which are still relatively central Cornwall. Crosslanes Farm in particular was an exceptionally good project where we got lithium grades of up to 100 parts per million, good flow rates, and that's the area we're looking to develop into our demonstration project. Blackwater we've completed, we're still analysing the data. We saw some good lithium concentrations. There's a bit of work to do around that site in particular. We then drilled up at Trelava in the clay country, mainly to provide regional data and also some information for our hard rock. So what does that look like on a map? Unfortunately, I've had to anonymize this map somewhat so that it's not as detailed, but essentially we've been focused on this central area of Cornwall. As you can see with the yellow and white dots, we have gone up to St Austell where we have our hard rock project to try and push out our sort of realms of known, but we're looking to expand across Cornwall. The blue lines there are some of the major structures that we're interested in, so you can see the potential is fairly large for what we're trying to target. Ultimately, exploration is all about the test work. We drill and we get core, and as geologists, we absolutely love that, but it is all about the test work, and it's all about the hydrogeology. I'm a mining geologist, so I struggle to say that out loud, but it genuinely is all about the hydrogeology. So what we're trying to test for are sort of key characteristics. So flow rate and max yield, permeability, geochemical composition, the reservoir behavior, the fracture characteristics, and the geology. So we drill, we get drill core. You can see a photo on the top there of some lovely drill core that looks like it's been chewed by a dog. That's what we're looking for in our permeable intervals. And when we hit something like that, we go ahead and test it. We've been using Packer systems, for those of you familiar with those, essentially an inflatable balloon that goes down the borehole, isolates off either a structure or a series of structures, and then we're able to pump and inject into those structures. So we'll pump up from those structures to get our geochemistry data, to get our well yields, and to get some permeability data, and then we'll inject into them to get better permeability data and understand the sort of characteristics around that a little bit better. The test work we tend to employ are things like airlift testing, where we inject compressed air into the well to try and get to max yields. One of the issues we've come across recently is that we're drilling relatively slimline cord wells for exploration, which only have a a finite flow rate due to the kit you can put in the well. Essentially, we can't get big kit down the well, therefore we limit our flow rates with those exploration wells. We can model that up, and one of the things we're doing with our demonstration project is looking to drill some wider diameter, more traditional oil and gas style wells, or traditional geothermal style wells, I should say, in order to get those flow rates up. Perfect. We'll move on from there. So moving on to some of the extraction test works, I think that's probably the more exciting side for a lot of the lithium projects that we have dotted around. Cornwall is incredibly special with its geochemistry. We have very unique brine characteristics here that you don't see many, in fact, in any other project that I've seen across the world. And what we have here is relatively low concentrations of lithium compared to, say, the South American projects, where you might be getting to several hundred parts per million. We're sitting at about 100 parts per million at the depths we're talking about, but it's incredibly clean with a high lithium to TDS ratio. So what that means is your lithium concentration to your total dissolved salts is high, significantly higher than these other projects. And that makes it very favorable towards processing. We also have very low levels of detrimental elements. So we have low magnesium, we've got relatively low sodium, relatively low calcium, relatively low iron. So uh, all of these metals which can cause havoc with your processing and ultimately your battery chemistry, we don't have in large quantities to start with, so they're much easier to separate. As a team, we've spent a lot of time within our extraction work stream. We developed a testing facility here in 2021, and as part of a government grant, we built a small lithium pilot plant, which we were using on a batch process where we were bringing fluids to it, testing those fluids, seeing how they reacted to different technology types. And as a company, we wanted to understand what technologies were on the market. So we haven't gone to develop our own lithium extraction technologies. We're going to market, seeing what's available and bringing them back in and testing them. So we developed a testing facility that consisted of a pilot plant, 2 reverse osmosis systems, and within that we've now tested 4 DLE technologies on site. I'll get into the off-site test work on the next slide. We've done a significant amount of that. But what we're looking to do is essentially select a technology to take forward to the demonstration project that we're hoping to launch. Well, has been launched from a planning perspective, but we're hoping to actually get into construction in 2025. So all of this work is now focusing from, really screening what's available on market and trying to narrow it down into what we think is best for our particular geochemistry. I said I'd talk about DLE trials, and here we go, basically. So we've tested 32 different DLE vendors, and you can roughly break them up into 3 categories. There's absorption and ion exchange, with absorption being probably the more established, more well-known technology for lithium extraction. And then the others, which are where you get into some of the fancier, newer technologies coming along line with particular things like electrochemistry and stuff that's started to catch up. So your adsorption ion exchange work in a similar fashion, that you have some form of media, and what you're doing is you're passing your brine over that media and trying to recover just the lithium out of it. You then wash that media with either a water or an acid to release your lithium product. What we've found is that you have some ion exchange technologies which work for very high lithium concentrations, over 250 parts per million. Your adsorption technologies tend to work within that sort of 200 plus 250 parts per million, although some have been trialed at 100 parts per million. Then your ion exchange, you've got the suite of technologies that work at that 100 part per million and down. I'll go into a little bit more detail about our findings, but in general, we're erring towards an ion exchange technology because of the lower salt content, which tends to function a little bit better with ion exchange rather than the adsorption techs. So what we've been trying to do as a company is really scale up. So as I said, we've tested 32, and that number increases on an almost monthly basis. So that starts out as benchtop testing, where we'll send sort of 5 to 50 litres, depending on what the company needs. And for all that, we'll get a report. If we think that the technology is promising, we'll look to cycle test, where we'll start sending 1,000 litres sort of IBCs out and see how that works. If the technology, again, if the report's coming back good and we're excited about the technology, that's when we look to pilot. So of those 32, we've narrowed it down to 4 to test on site, and we would happily test more in the future. That's probably a different conversation. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is get to this demonstration plant size. And you see how the flow rates change. You're going from testing 5 litres in a lab up to what we're looking to do, which is a continuous flow of 5 litres per second from well into a continuous flow demonstration plant. And ultimately, we'll take that and we'll look to commercialize it, likely in a modular style arrangement, to aim for 20 to 30 litres a second flow rate from well, in order to get that commercial production of, call it 500 tonnes per annum. So the findings to date, we've had some success with absorption. We've had some success using concentration techniques such as reverse osmosis in order to utilize absorption better. But generally, we're seeing that you need a higher salt content and a higher lithium grade in order to get that absorption technology to work really well. So our greatest success has come from ion exchange, for the sort of 100 parts per million lithium brine that we have. And what we're seeing is that the ion exchange systems are accelerating quickly, and we're seeing really positive recoveries out of those, really, genuinely good recovery times out of those, and the other, amounts out of those. And the other thing we're seeing is that the time for the media lifespan is increasing significantly as the technologies develop. So we're fairly excited about the use of ion exchange for our particular brines. Um, we will and will continue for the foreseeable future to continue funding test work with the LE vendors. This market is expanding hugely. Technologies which weren't around 5 years ago are suddenly starting to become contenders for at least demonstration, if not commercialization. So we're going to continue as a company to fund and research this area. Um, we think we have a technology. We believe quite strongly we have a technology contender for our demonstration plant, and we're working that up in some detailed engineering at the moment. Um, but what we've particularly learned, and the biggest point, is that all brines are not created equal, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, your brine will be fairly unique and specific. Therefore, you need to do the test work and trial the technology specific for your brine. If we, 3-4 years ago, had just gone with the technology that was the market leader at the time, it probably wouldn't have worked out for us. So we've spent a lot of time and money testing. We understand our brines well. We understand the technologies well. It's a critical message for any of these lithium projects. So I'll move on to the Cross Lanes demonstration project now, and try and go into a little bit more detail about this, because ultimately this is where all of our work is coming together. So we've done the targeting side, and Cross Lanes as a location came up as one of the best. We then went in and we drilled it. The drilling phase was fairly prolonged, because we decided to go deeper and do a little bit more with the borehole than we'd originally planned. And we've done all this extraction test work to work out what works best for the chemistry there, that we're ready to take that forward to a demonstration project. And what we're looking to do with that demonstration project is front end some of the risk. So we're looking to drill 2 commercially viable wells, a producer and injector. We're continuing to explore the surrounding areas to see whether that can be enhanced by other structures leading into the same plant. And then we will build a relatively small, about 1/5 the size of what we're aiming for commercially, plant on the site that will operate on continuous flow for a year-long basis. So I'll take you into a little bit of the detail of the exploration results that we had out of Cross Lanes. So it was drilled and completed in February 2023 to a depth of just shy of 2 kilometres. I probably should have mentioned at the start, 2 kilometres is our sweet spot of what we're aiming for. The reason for that is the stress regime in Cornwall is one part, in that there's a notable stress regime under the 2.5 kilometre mark when you get deeper than 2.5 kilometre. So in terms of permeability, which is critical for these projects, we think staying above that level is more beneficial. And also the fact that at that depth you've got relatively warm temperatures. The max downhole temperature of this was about 72 degrees, although that climbs the longer you pump it. So that means it's warm enough to be used for direct heating applications, but it's not too hot that you're dealing with superheated or steam. So for our designs and wanting to keep the footprint relatively modest, the capex relatively modest, and generally keep things simple because it's easier, we're wanting to stay below that magic sort of 100-degree boiling temperature mark. So that's why staying in that 2 kilometers works best for us. We saw an average concentration of 100 milligrams per liter, 100 milligrams per liter of lithium, and we saw a positive trend of lithium and temperature with depth, but also with time of pumping. So we are gathering evidence, although we can't say conclusively. There's a link between depth within this system and lithium grade. There's an obvious link with heat that has been proved, but the lithium grade, we're seeing a link there. What we're seeing is the longer we pump, we're getting water drawn in from depth. So we're seeing both the temperature and the lithium grades rise. We've got lots of anecdotal information on that from the historic mines when they were pumped for 20, 30, 40 years to keep them deep watered for mining. But we're starting to see that in our exploration results, which is quite good because relying on 200-year-old data can be tricky, particularly with investors. On the hydrogeology side, we sustained flow rates of 5 litres a second. The caveat to that is that was the maximum we could achieve with the equipment we had in the size of borehole. But our drawdown was almost nothing. It was 3 meters at 5 liters a second, which is very, very low. So we're confident that these structures that we've intercepted can sustain significantly higher flow rates, which is why we're progressing this site towards demonstration. Recovery time was 95% in 5 hours. So again, very quick. We're seeing a system that's permeable, it's recharging, and it contains lithium and it's hot. So for what we're trying to do, that's a fairly big win. Just in terms of photos of this slide, you can see the rig setup on the drone image there. You can see some of the core. Interestingly, that core doesn't look that spectacular for permeability, but when we tested it, it really was. You don't need to get that much. You don't need to get that big a crack in the rock at nearly 2,000 meters in order to get high levels of permeability. And then the photos on top with the pretty steam are some of our ILF tests. So what you can see there is hot water from depth being produced and steaming off. So what are we looking to do on the site? Beautiful photo. I wish Cornwall was that sunny today. It's not. It's paying it down with rain. What we're looking to do is drill 2 wells, production well where it's labeled and the injection well where it's labeled. We're having, unfortunately, from our drill contractor's point of view, having to separate the collar locations of the borehole to get maximum separation on structure to decrease the risk of breakthrough. So we're looking to drill 2 holes, both to about 2,000 meters, and then put the DLE processing facility hopefully on the old farm site, so redevelop that into a processing facility. And I've got some photos of artistic sketches of what that might look like. We're also looking to install a temporary lagoon so that we can do prolonged test work on the wells when we first drill them before they're continually flowing between each other. And it will also aid with some of the other hydrogeological characterization tests that we want to achieve. What you can see very vaguely in the background, hopefully you can see my cursor down here, is what was the old Wheel Jane mine. So while it looks like farmers' fields and fairly rural, you are in a location there where there's some significant infrastructure and there has been significant mine workings in the past. So from a planning and permitting perspective, it's a fairly good location. What does that look like in detail? So you can see some of the plans that are going to be supporting our planning application, which will hopefully be submitted tail end of this month with a processing site, 2 rig pads and a lagoon. And what that looks like in a little bit more detail is what you can see here. So these are some artistic mock-ups of what is a relatively large building, but essentially a large barn, our pads, and then the lagoon, which will be filled in at a later date. And ultimately, as I said at the start, we want lots of these little plants. So what we're looking to do is have scalable production. So Cross Lanes will be our first. It will be our demonstration project. We hope to be able to commercialize that very quickly because of the way we're front-ending the risk and front-ending the capital investment, put in the wells, pipes, utilities, etc. While we trial the DLE at demonstration scale, and then we're looking to ramp up very fast. With the sort of expectation of developing around 4 sites per year from 2027. So we better get cracking when it comes to planning applications and whatnot. But that's what we're looking to do, with a view of getting to that sort of 10,000 tons per annum or plus by sometime in the 2030s. So I'll wrap up my presentation there and move on to some questions and answers. Apologies if I've raced that a little bit too quickly through that. It's always tricky when you're talking to black boxes on a laptop screen. But just to sum up, Cornish Lithium is looking to build a sustainable future for the UK and for the UK battery market. We have the two projects, so we sort of hedged our risk slightly between geothermal and hard rock, and we're developing both. We have a very strong technical team, a strong management team, a large mineral rights package, and we're well funded. So we're trying to get after it. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, and take some questions.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was a really great presentation, super informative. And we're getting a lot of really good questions in the chat. So I'm going to start off. We had quite a few questions about the lithium concentration of the brines. So the
Yep.
first one was from Hattie, who asks, and I know you kind of talked about different concentrations throughout your presentation. But what is like the typical concentration of lithium in the geothermal brines around Cornwall that you're looking at?
So, as far as we can tell, it varies with depth, and
Hmm.
that's a relationship that we're still trying to understand properly. So, around the 1 to 2 kilometer mark, you're seeing somewhere around 100 parts per million, at least on the projects we've drilled.
Hmm.
If you drop shallower than a kilometer, then you'll drop that grade. Um, and there has been reported values of higher than that from greater depths. I'm erring on what I say there because I can't remember if it's publicly printed or not. So I've got to not
Fair
breach
enough.
any NDAs there. Um, the reality is there's been little work to characterize those grades by depth, and that's something that we're trying
Okay.
to work out. I think it sounds like salesy talk from a geothermal lithium company, which is what we are. But what is significant about Cornwall is not necessarily the grade, it's about the geochemistry and cleanliness of the fluid we're dealing with. So
Okay.
there's no hiding the fact that it is a relatively low grade deposit when you compare it to North America or South
Mm.
America. But it's significantly cleaner geochemically, and magnesium levels are almost not there. So from a processing point of view, it's easy processing in comparison, and that's what's special essentially.
No, that's great. Sort of related to that, we had two questions, one from Pablo and the other from Scott. Pablo's question was, do you foresee the production of geothermal lithium constant along the duration of the project, or is there a decrease in concentration of lithium as you're producing? And then related to that from Scott was, if different brines require specific processes, what is the effect of the concentration of lithium changing throughout production? Like, are you going to have to switch technologies, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean both very good questions. So to take the first one in terms of will we see the heat and lithium grades drop off over time? The real answer to that is we don't fully know yet.
Mm.
So the historic mining data, where they were dewatering mines here and constantly analyzing things like temperature and chemistry, suggests that that will increase over time because you start drawing on deeper and deeper fluids in these structures, which are kilometers and kilometers deep and kilometers long. Um, but every geoscientist around this virtual table will know that that can't go on forever. There
Mm.
is there may be some element of recharge from the granite and the overlying sediments, um, but that won't be instantaneous and it may never get back to the same levels. So what we're generally expecting to see is an increase over time initially, and then there will be a peak, and then there will be a decrease. What the time limit of that is completely unknown to us, and it's one of the things we're trying to characterize with things like running the demonstration plant. The obvious question from that is, well, how do you how do you manage the resource and reservoir piece? And the answer is that's also very complicated. So the approach we're taking links back to the idea of having these relatively small plants. If we can have a relatively small plant with a relatively small capex, we can get payback quite quickly, and then just keep pumping it until it runs out. And in doing so, answer some of those questions, which will allow us to do further development as we go. Um, so there is an element of suck it and see is the phrase we use when it comes to pumping these boreholes. Um, but there's strong evidence to suggest that increase over time is in the order of magnitude of years. So the mine that we drilled under very close to where I'm currently sitting in my office was dewatered for 30 years at flow rates akin to what we're talking about for our commercial production, and it only saw increases in temperature and total dissolved salts during that time. So while we don't have firm data that we can put into a compliant resource, we have strong evidence from the mining heyday that would suggest that's the case.
Great. And as far as those technologies that you were talking out for actually extracting the lithium, if the lithium concentrations are changing over time, do you have a plan for like how you manage like which technologies you're using for extraction or?
Yeah, so generally, most of the technologies are have a level of being able to handle different salt and
Mhm.
different lithium grades. So while there's technology suites that are better for set criteria, going up in levels of salt in particular, um, they all seem to function relatively well with a spread. So if you're going from 70 to 130 ppm lithium, you shouldn't see too much issue. If you start to see a material change, then it's more about changing the parameters uh, of your plant rather than necessarily changing the technology type. You'd have to have a really material change to need to do that. And what we're hedging on is with the ion exchange technologies we're looking to utilize, they have a range which is expansive over what could happen to our grades. So they're good at that sort of sweet spot of 100. They can go double that and they can go half that. So we're relatively comfortable we can manage that within the plant. Certainly compared to a lot of like traditional hard rock
Mhm.
processes where you need to have an absolute constant through grade, DLE has a little bit more flexibility than that generally. Although there will be points, so it very much comes down to to the technology type specifics.
No, that's great. I am now going to delve into some drilling questions, which I apologize in advance. I am a geophysicist, so my drilling knowledge is very minimal. I might butcher some of these questions. But I think the first question that I saw was, what is your typical reservoir hole size?
As in the boreholes we're looking to drill within our reservoir? Yeah.
Yep.
So the exploration wells we've been drilling have been done with traditional mining diamond core. So we've been drilling PQ at surface for a couple of hundred meters, which is 122 mil diameter, and then dropping that to HQ, which is about 96 mil diameter, outside diameters those are. But that obviously comes with limitations. So what we're looking to drill for commercial wells will be around the 9 inch or the 9 and whichever quarters. You'll have to forgive me. I'm a mining geologist, and I'm trying to get my head around the fact oil and gas still uses bloody inches and quarters of inches rather than millimeters. But yes, we're looking at the 9 and I think it's 9 3/4 at surface, and then probably dropping that down to about 7 at the tail.
Okay. And then I think you had mentioned that the target depth is around 2.5 kilometers. How long approximately is it taking to drill these wells?
So exploration wise, it takes about 3 months. Diamond core is relatively slow. We're anticipating our production wells being drilled in about 40 days apiece.
Okay,
We're trying to get that down though. I'm under a lot of pressure to get that down.
sounds good. Okay. This question from Barois, I apologize for your name. What is your strategy for well implantation regarding structures, faults, and possible cycling of water? What I understand is that permeable medium are fractures in granite, so it can lead to high risk of cycling.
Yeah, so I mean, cycling breakthrough is one of our biggest risks, and it's one of the difficulties we've had within this project. That when you go to traditional geothermal outfits, they're not too worried because as long as you're getting the heat recovery from the rocks at depth, they don't actually care if the water comes back in a lot of the time. But we really do. So the way we've designed our wells is to try and keep the open hole sections as far apart as possible within the land and mineral rights constraints that we have. And then we're also trying to take into account the natural flow that we're seeing within the structures that we've managed to gather data on through our exploration. Um, to be honest, it's one of the bigger risks we have to the project is seeing premature breakthrough. We've also designed the well so that the sorry, I'm just trying to think how much I can say without giving away things that would breach confidentiality. We're trying to design them to deal with the fact that cold water will end up pluming downwards and hot water will end up pluming upwards. So again, we've put that sort of viewpoint into our well designs. Um, when you look at some of the other data available from things like the Hot Dry Rocks project that was drilled here in the 80s, and the other geothermal projects that have released public information because of the way they're funded, um, we're fairly confident we're going to get a reasonable amount of upwelling fluid. If we get the wells correct in terms of which way the natural flow is going within these structures, that will help mitigate it. And where possible, we would look to utilize other structures. So we produce from one, inject into another to try and reduce that interaction as well. But it's a headache that's done on a project by project basis, depending on the information we have available.
Great. Thank you. We now have a series of questions. And again, I apologize, not a driller. So Scott M says you should be able to drill both wells from the same site as per oil and gas wells. And then we had another question that was, how far apart are you planning your producer and injector pair? Is this optimized using dynamic modeling, minimizing lithium and heat decline over time? And then Mark asks, what about multiple pairs of injector producers from a single site? Is this an option?
There's a lot of questions. So multiple pairs of producers injectors from a single site. It is an
Mm,
option on some sites, and it's an option that we're looking to develop. Um, the reality is we need to get a couple of big wells in the ground where we can run much higher flow rate tests, tracer tests, injection tests, all that sort of jazz, in order to fully understand that. But yes, that's an area of significant development for us that we're looking at for the future. How far apart are the wells at depth on this particular project? I believe they're about 400 meters apart at depth, which is, we think from the modeling we've done, sufficient for what we're trying to do. And I can't remember the rest of the questions from that long list. So you might have to remind me what the next
Sorry.
one was.
Is the okay, how far apart are you planning your producer injector pair, and is this optimized using dynamic
Using dynamic modeling. It's
modeling? Yeah.
it is to some extent, but our modeling is relatively limited due to the lack of information we have on the structures. So um, onshore Cornwall, there's almost no seismic, and seismic doesn't actually work very well for these structures due to their orientation and a lack of big difference between the structures and the host rock. So we're working with models based from the historic mining information and from the drilling that we've carried out to date, which means our dynamic models are there and we have hydrogeological models, but they are not as detailed as what you'd see in a much bigger oil and gas type project.
Mhm.
Um, Hence why we're trying to get some bigger wells into the ground so that we can really test that out.
You mentioned seismic, and just again, because I'm a geophysicist, have you looked at any like potential field data or any electromagnetic data in the area? Is that more
Yeah,
helpful than the seismic?
yeah. So we've got gravity, we've got EM, and we're looking to test MT as well. There's been
Interesting.
a little bit of success with MT in a published project by the BGS recently down in Cornwall.
Okay. Um, Adrian asks this question. Mike, what do you see as the main risks to delivering a commercial project?
That is a good question. So from the drilling perspective, I think it was what we were just discussing about getting breakthrough and being able to continually flow at reasonable grades and temperatures for a prolonged period of time. That's something we're going to have to have to trial, invest in, and give a go. Although there's information to support it, but I'd say our biggest risk sits at breakthrough within the wells. Um, on the technology side, I think anyone who follows the DLE market will know there's been some fairly difficult times for DLE companies trying to get demonstration and sort of larger scale pilots over the line, with some pretty high profile delays and issues with other projects that I won't name for legal reasons, but everyone can Google. Um, so getting a technology that's able to scale, able to continue to produce while balancing things like media life and particularly OpEx is going to be one of the large challenges. We're comfortable as it stands that the project stands up economically from a global perspective in terms of cost of production per ton. Um, but there's no denying that DLE is a more expensive way of producing lithium than traditional solar evaporation. And that's something that does have to be balanced, um, because I don't believe there's going to be a difference in price for lithium if it's produced in a greener way compared to not. Um, so yeah, they're probably the biggest things. And then as a junior explorer, you've always got to say access to funding. At the end of the day, we have to get funded.
Um, that's actually interesting. You mentioned during your presentation about the funding that you did just receive a quite large funding package, it sounds like. Um,
Yeah.
how, so aside from this, like, I guess, does this mean like, will your company be listed? What is the plan there, I guess?
Yeah, so we're private and have been private to date. We have always said that we would look to list when the markets are right and when the projects are at the right stage, but we don't have a set date as to when that may or may not happen at this stage. We've been very fortunate to be able to raise good amounts of money privately, and that's allowed us to be fairly nimble and agile in the way we've done things. Um, I will say we act like a public company, so with everything we do, we report to the right levels, and
Mhm.
we follow essentially we we develop our projects to act like a listed company, so that when the listing does or doesn't come, we're able to do it fairly fast. But I can't give an exact date at the moment. We're well funded. We're funded through our next step as well.
Okay.
And you'd have to ask my senior managers what they would plan to do from that.
No, that sounds good. Um, okay, here's another question from Scott M. What is the final form that the lithium is prepared for transport to the end user?
Yeah, so um, we're looking at the moment to produce a lithium chloride solution. So it will be a liquid. I won't say the exact percentage of that at this stage, but we're looking at least over 20%
Okay.
lithium chloride solution, which can then be off-taken as is, or it could look to go to a central um, processing facility that we control. So longer term, we'd look to do that in-house. Short term, we'd look to just off-site that lithium chloride as a product. There is also the option for us to produce lithium sulfate. So if you use hydrochloric acid within DLE, you'll produce a lithium chloride. If you use sulfuric acid, you'll produce a lithium sulfate. We are doing a bit of work on that at the moment to see whether we want to do one or the other. Generally, I wouldn't have said they're interchangeable, but it's not a huge change in order to um, to do one or the other, depending on the technology type you use. So we're keeping our options open. Our hard rock project, on the other hand, is going straight to hydroxide, so it'll produce a battery grade hydroxide product. But for the geothermal, because it's lots of small plants dotted around, we're going
Mhm.
for an intermediary product that can get us to market quickly with a view to refining um, ourselves later.
Seems smart. Um, Philip asks, are there any CO2 or other gases produced when the fluid is depressurized?
Yep, and, another good question. So we do have some dissolved gas content in our brines, relatively low levels, in fact, very low levels compared to what you might see elsewhere. Um, it's something that we're looking to manage through our processing, so that we control that degassing, and essentially put it back. Um, I can't really go into more detail than that at this stage, I don't think.
Okay. Um, I think we have time for just a couple more questions. AK asks, are there any synergies between CCS or bioenergy?
Um, I'm not sure I know the answer to that, if I'm brutally honest. CCS, would there be any synergies where you could utilize the wells for a CCS function? Possibly. I don't know. I don't know how that would link to the geology well enough. Um, I'm definitely not a CCS expert, and
Mm.
bioenergy, not that we've come across. So we're simply looking at direct heating applications using sort of, standard heat exchangers. We haven't come across any bioenergy type, um, type synergies yet.
Think, let me, one last question from Raf. In oil field water injection projects, the chemistry of the injected water is important as the wrong chemistry can lead to downhole precipitation and permeability plugging. Have you considered this with the chemistry of the reinjection water?
Yes, very much. For us, the biggest constraint of reinjection is environmental permitting. So we've got to be incredibly careful with what our reinjection looks like in order to make sure that we can meet the criteria from the Environment Agency. Um, Generally, with the DLE processes we're looking at, you're stripping out the lithium. You're not really changing much else within the water because it acts like a Brita water filter. So um, you might get some additional water added, but generally you're getting water added rather than any particular chemicals. One of the advantages of using hydrochloric acid for that is it's quite easy to manage within that process. Um, but it's something we're keeping a very, very close eye on because we have to convince the Environment Agency that we can re-inject that levels. And as you say, if you get it wrong, you get precipitation. You don't want it going into cold to hot rocks. That can be bad as well. So yeah, it takes quite a fine balance. But certainly the technologies we're looking to progress are ones where we feel that the um, waste products coming out of the plant won't cause us a problem for that field. We have rejected other technology types that we've tested, um, where we feel you get left with the wrong makeup within your waste fluid.
Okay. I think this final question that we have, do you anticipate that the water which is re-injected will be replenished with lithium?
So it's something we're doing some work in, and there's been some academic work done by various universities to look at. There's no denying that there are areas in all of these projects which are enriched in lithium in the rock, and lithium prefers to be in solution. So it may well be that you see some leaching. The reality is we don't fully understand that process and how long it will take. There has been some public data to suggest it can be relatively fast under the right conditions. But we're building our model based on the fact that it won't regenerate. We're not going to build our reservoir assuming a regeneration factor that we've not proved. So we'll assume that it doesn't, but the science says it might, if that answers the question.
No, that does. Thank you. Well, I think, this has been a great presentation. So much information, definitely. And it seems like your plans for the future and expansion and commercializing are very promising. So look forward to hearing more from Cornish Lithium in the future. Thank you again for joining us. And thank you to you all for joining our webinar today. As I said at the start, we will be distributing the recording of this presentation on our website in just a few days' time. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, we'll be hosting other webinars in the coming months. So the best way to find out what's happening is to join the email list or to follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you again, Mike. Again, this was a really great presentation. And thank you to the audience for all the really great questions. And we will see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.